It's a beautiful day in the neighborhood. Will you be my neighbor? Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to Deep Thoughts. As I test this Herrera Stelli Toro to see if it's going to canoe, tunnel, do something else. It's already got a little bit of a tunnel going here on the side there. Just lit it. A little crack down the side there. Okay, so today, as you can tell, the name of the video is going to be called Gravity for Deniers. And the reason why I'm making this episode, because I already have a gravity episode. Except, you know, it's funny. I make an episode, an educational sort of episode like that, in my opinion, and I didn't think about a better way to say it, and a better way to analogize it. So, some of you guys get on the Facebook group, and you'll post these funny memes, and really super creative graphics, which is interesting. You know, someone's spending a lot of time on this to get people to refute that gravity exists. And one of the funniest suggestions for a lack of belief is that if you were to go down to the bottom of or even just get to the edge of a ball, you'd start slipping off the edge, just like anything in this world. You know, if we had a big sphere and I'm sitting on it, obviously if I go to one of the sides, I'm going to slip off. And I understand why that is so alluring and so profound, that, oh my God, these people said it was a ball, and I never once thought from my childhood to being an adult that I would have fallen off the ball. And now that I have thought about it, I'm going to pound social media with these memes. Okay, nothing wrong with going down a path of organic belief development. But we have to not feed the misinformed about everything else group of folks with big errors on our side. The other one I get, and I'll see in the comments, is someone will say, well, I think it's just air pressure. And, you know, I've been down all this too as a kid and reprised it as an adult. There are experiments that prove that it's not air. And so to walk around saying it's air pressure, it's not conclusive, because you can build a box made of plexiglass, put a feather in there, pull all of the air out, and just roll that box around, and the feather falls beautifully, just like a little BB would fall, you know, back and forth. In fact, without the air inside the container, gravity works even better. So it's not air pressure. Now, I believe that I've told you exactly what it is, and my, science is based off of the writings of the gentleman that had discovered electromagnetic waves / electricity. Now, what's interesting is that we toss around this whole thing about how brilliant Tesla was. And you should think he's brilliant, and you should think he's one of the smartest, if not the smartest human beings that's ever walked the earth. I don't know if he was a nice guy, but he was brilliant. And he explicitly said in several letters and writings, communications with friends and communications with the public, that every single thing he ever created was based on ethereal models. So as you hear about ethereal models, it would be, well, I would just appeal to your respect for Tesla, meaning the dude who's created all this stuff. I mean, unfortunately, it might be a little overdone at this point, in terms of us getting leukemia from half of his inventions, but he would have saw to it that nothing harmed man if he had had the chance. But what's interesting to me is sort of the thought process that gravity only has one property, and that's to push down. That's it. It can never push in any other direction. It pushes straight down. Well, don't we laugh when we hear about the people from several millennia ago, when they thought the world was on the back of a turtle. And then they said, well, what do you think the turtle's standing on? And the old lady says, well, it's turtles all the way down. I mean, do we think that she has a point? Is it two turtles? Are we on the back of a turtle? Is there strictly an up and strictly a down? Is God up there and the devil's down there? Is this the kind of world that we believe, or that we sort of surround the conversation with gravity before we even talk about the science? And therefore, everything scientific is stuck in this envelope of there's a true up and there's a true down in the universe. Like God even cares, I guess. Now, I need to put a disclaimer at the beginning. If you're a student trying to figure out what gravity is and you're watching this, what's going to be fascinating for you is that you're actually going to get the truth in this particular video. And when you go to school, you're going to get the opposite lie about how it works. But you can do your own research and find out that Faraday and Tesla, just go look up those two guys and their theory of gravity. It's ethereal based. They actually had it 1,000% correct. But this video is going to be half about the metaphysical mind of thinking about gravity, and the other side is going to be what it really is. So let's go at this whole thing about you would fall off the bottom of the earth if you went down there. You can't even live in Cairo. And again, I know that the theory is that the world's flat for some people, and therefore, no matter where you go on earth, you're being pushed down, and you don't feel any movement, and that's your explanation. And hey, you know, I guess in some matrixy kind of thing, that guess that could be real. You know, again, I don't really have the the solution for you guys when it comes to flying from, say, Glasgow to Cairo, and the amount of horizontal speeds you're going to have to increase your vehicle by to be sitting right on the equator, traveling 1,000 miles an hour from Glasgow that might be going 350. Where's all that other velocity come from? How come the ship isn't getting torn up? I mean, it's almost at the point now where if you travel too quickly to Cairo, you might get torn apart horizontally. So I don't understand how that works. Perhaps it's just some beautiful synergy of the atmosphere that pushes you around. So just know I do have questions like you have questions. But let's look at this whole idea about falling off the bottom of the world. Because I flew from Los Angeles to Sydney, and I did not take a trip to China. My company wanted to. They wanted to give me a 36-hour layover. Unbelievable. My boss went, no thanks. But I understand the idea that it's a disc, but if I had flown from Los Angeles to Sydney on a disc, I would have had a really, really long flight. You know, I think much longer. I didn't stop off anywhere. But now, remember when you were a little kid and it rained outside, or it snowed outside, or it was very sunny outside, and you had a relative that lived in a different town, far enough away that your weather pattern isn't their weather pattern, and you were talking to them on the phone, and you made the funny mistake as a child of saying, you know, to your grandmother, your grandfather, whatever, you know, isn't it sad that it's raining? And they go, well, it's not raining where I am. And your mind blows, right? You go, what? You mean where, you know, what I see outside the window isn't what everybody sees outside the window? We're not in a single state universe? No, honey, we're not. I live far away from you, and the clouds over you are different than the clouds over me. Okay. And it starts to expand your mind. It starts to get you to understand that things are relative to each one of our little sensor machines called the human body. So the first misnomer about gravity, outside of the official junk definition of, you know, the earth pulling on you, no. The earth pulling on you model can work, but it has no basis in physics, and so it's a phenomenon, right? But the ethereal model of this outside pressure pushing on the surface of a ball, which made it a ball in the first place, makes complete sense because you see it all the time, right? How many times have I said in episodes, I mean, if it's a drinking game, you guys would be borderline alcoholics. Exactly how a bubble exists in water is exactly how any stellar body exists in the universe. The only difference is that the pressure from the universe is far different than the pressure that water creates. But water is simply a higher construct of ethereal particles, H2O on average, right, than a single ethereal particle. So it takes probably quadrillions times quadrillions of versions of, or numbers of ethereal particles to start creating mass in the universe and moving things around and getting spherical poles established, and then building up from there to build quarks, and then finally, chemical elements, and then compounds, etc., etc. We are being pushed down to the surface of the earth by ether. A tremendous amount of this ether goes actually through our bodies because we have more space between us than we have actual blockage. But we have enough blockage, and there's enough infinite ether out there that's pushing down on us that we get yanked down to the earth. The bigger we are, the more impact we have from ethereal particles pushing down on us, and therefore we weigh more. Smaller we get, less impact, we weigh less. An ethereal particle is the most benign thing in the universe. It has no charge. It's not a positive, it's not a negative. However, when, just like in a big crowd, when they start bumping into each other on a three-dimensional level, they could probably create several different shapes, but one of the shapes they most likely create is a sphere by bumping into each other in a three-dimensional manner. We're talking about particles hitting from above, from below, from every single conceivable tangent to the curve of impact and ricochet. Those that bounce off of each other will later be categorized as a dielectric wave. Those that go in orbit will be known as a magnetic wave. And when those two happen to bang into each other, we get an electromagnetic wave. An electromagnetic wave is very interesting because it starts to create this sort of exchange program between spheres. When those two, the dielectric and the magnetism, bang into each other, remember one's bouncing back and one's going in a circle, when they hit each other, something very special occurs. It creates this tunnel of frequency that if you're very similar in a conductive manner, you're going to be able to take an electron, or part of this wave of energy, and as long as there's an exchange of mass, right? I'm going to give you part of my thing, and just like a hose, in order to push the water out of the hose, you got to put more water in the other end, right? So you push, someone else is going in, and you're going out. And then typically it's in some sort of loop, which we call the valence. It's the surface of a conductive material like a gold wire, copper wire, whatever, and it goes in a circle. It has to exchange. Otherwise you would start losing part of this ether into some pocket, and the mass that originally existed to create all these waves, this dielectric magnetism and electromagnetism reaction, would simply dissipate. And that's probably what happens when you have fire tearing apart mass. Fire is a super aggravated state of sort of unraveling the sweater. When you start pulling a thread out of a sweater, what starts happening? It starts disappearing, right? Well, fire is essentially, we could call it a chemical reaction, but it's really just the physical reaction of something's being undone, something's being so agitated by excited particles that these things are starting to just vaporize, start to unravel their elliptical spheres. But some things survive fire, right? You burn something down, a log down, and what do you have? You have a bunch of carbon at the base. Because carbon is such a fundamental particle in the universe. So is hydrogen, although hydrogen is very combustive. The carbon, you can't get anything inside of it, meaning you can't undo it. You could pull a thread out of a sweater, but if I give you a sheet of carbon fiber and I say go ahead and pull the thread out of the carbon fiber 4x4 sheet, you're just looking at it going, well, there's no thread to pull out. And I'm like, yeah, because it's so dense and so intense, you're never going to be able to undo a carbon fiber plate. But let's go back to the Earth. The Earth is a ball, the sun is a ball, and the moon is a ball. because these things have organically formed out of the very artery of movement of ethereal particles. Meaning the ethereal particles are in this beautiful, beautiful dance in the universe between celestial bodies. Now there's a ton of ethereal particles that are not necessarily trapped inside of this ecosystem, but once they get close to an ecosystem, they can easily get buried inside. What am I talking about? Well, there's these beautiful illustrations, and I'll try to put one in this video, of how the sun has a big gigantic magnetic pole, an electrical pole around it, and then the earth has one, and the moon has one. And some of these artists have done an amazing job showing you that the ejection out of the top of the sun can spread out so far that it goes inside the top of the earth, which then starts adding to the atomic mass of the earth. And the earth is actually injecting the moon. Now, technically speaking, everything within a certain proximity is injecting each other. Technically speaking, Jupiter could be injecting us a little bit. It would be an infinitesimal amount, but it could be doing that. Jupiter could definitely be slamming all of its moons, and probably Mars. It just depends on the rate, sort of the amperage of what's coming out of the top of these Van Allen belt ejectors, right? Actually, it comes out of the bottom, goes in the top. Comes out of the bottom, goes in the top. Okay. The spherical shape is a natural shape that happens in the universe, and this is why we have bubbles, right? No one is going down inside the ocean and saying, hey, everybody, when H2O surrounds oxygen, you need to turn into a bubble. Why? Why can't we do a square? Why can't we do a cone or a cylinder? Because this is how we all bump into each other on a subatomic ethereal level. How many of you have seen your drain water into your faucet, into your sink in your kitchen, into the tub drain? Some of those holes that happen out there where farmers have actually put pipes into the bottom of their ponds or lakes because they have to drain them every once in a while. And you see those crazy circular vortexes. Well, who's out there making it a vortex? What human being's out there going, nope, you need to do it in a square fashion. I want a square wave over. I want an hexagonal Saturn CG wave on the top of this thing. Nobody. The universe is doing that because that's the way things bump into each other. Now, how many times have you looked at it and you saw that the outer ring of one of those big drain holes, like sometimes those the pond ones actually have sinkholes that happen and it just drains out a lake and you go, oh my God, like I think Tahoe had something like this. The outer ring is going slower than the inner ring. The inner ring is going really, really fast. It's a vortex. It gets quicker as it goes towards the center. All right. The other thing is that the center typically has a hole in it because this stuff is going somewhere, because it has to have a negative pressure zone, an empty zone, before this stuff's going to have any place to go. So what does that tell us? That tells us that the universe is not equally dense. The universe has very dense areas, which would be like a sun, an earth, a moon, and then it has very sparse areas, which would be what NASA refers to as the vacuum of space, which is absolutely not a vacuum. It might be a vacuum of Beanie Babies, but it's not a vacuum of atomic mass. But why is the little funnel in the lake making a little tornado down to wherever the hell it's going? Because relative to the ball that we're on, that is fairly large for our size, in proportion to our size, the ethereal winds are pushing in. The Earth is blocking everything that would be pushing up, any significant amount that would be penetrating the plasma ball that's at the center of the Earth. And so that funnel goes down. It does it in your sink. It does it in your tub. It does it in the ocean. All right. But if you were to subtract that, there will never be at the ethereal level, let's just say, any disturbance in this sort of Mardi Gras crowd problem. You know, your Dodger Stadium on 4th of July game when everything lets out and there was 100,000 people in that place. We flow. We flow. We bump into each other. Now, if you were to take out the conscious mind out of a particle and just let them bang into each other and it's all just ricocheting physics, that's where you start getting these vortexes. But in a zero gravity, let's say zero relativity gravity section where you don't have something next to it pulling it down, this tornado thing starts turning it into a sphere because nothing's yanking it down to be a little cone. A conical drain, if you will. This is how you get the most fundamental grouping of ethereal particles. But as it is above, so too is it below, and as it is below, so too it is above. Right? That's the equation. That's both sides of the equation. If A equals B, then you could actually write equals A on the other side. It's all the same thing. Gravity is being explained, in my opinion, in a very silly way within some of the flat earth situations. If flat earth is true, and it very well could be, then we're in some wild situation here. We're in, we could be, again, a contact lens on top of a gigantic ball that's some other planet, like the Truman Show, right? The Truman Show, it was a small town that was in the movie, but it could have been as big as the Earth disk. And again, I flew to Sydney. I didn't take 24, 36 hours to get there. I think it was about a 12-hour flight. On the disk model, I would have traveled a lot further. The thing is this, and I'm going to pause here for 1 second. If you've gone down the road of the flat earth model, and let's just say it's not true, and someone can prove it later on, a year from now, whatever, there is that miraculous NASA mission that we're actually all on the same page with, okay? The problem is that the level of credibility that you might lose when it gets proven to be absolutely incorrect might be devastating. And I think you deserve a chance, obviously, infinitely, to be rewarded for being curious and to be rewarded for being a believer, even for the lack of evidence to prove you wrong. You can still be right, but gravity could still work the way that I'm telling you it works. And I'm not trying to be correct myself and trying to make you wrong. Trust me, that has nothing to do with what I'm doing here. Again, for those of you who saw Dark City, you know what I'm talking about. Those of you who may have seen Truman Show, and then you just pull that thing into some space. I always think that things are done for a reason. The whole firmament dome theory is that God is really, really close to us, and He's really, really working with us, although He's obviously letting a bunch of douchebags run the planet, but who knows how He works, right? So the idea is there has to be a way for you guys to accept both sides of the fence and simply say, well, if I'm not in this matrixy God place, which is really what the dome would be, then I must be in this other heliocentric thing. It doesn't mean NASA has done anything related to going to the moon. They can't seem to produce a picture of the Earth from space that isn't a composite. So I'm not wrong in doubting these space agencies and calling them into question. And I'm not a jerk for willing to examine the flat earth model as if it were totally true. And you're not a jerk if you believe it for 5 years, 10 years. Again, we don't have proof of either side of the game, but again, I think that the proof that it is flat is really poorly represented when you see images portraying the flat ocean out there. Again, I live right next to the ocean, man. I see it all the time. You see a flat ocean graphic, and then they say, okay, on a ball, what we're supposed to believe is that the ocean's actually round around a ball. Answer? Yeah, it is. It is. And again, you got to be 80 miles in the air before you're going to see that ocean out there starting to do a curve. At least. Okay, so if you could just do the math on that in your brain. The rods and cones in your eyes are not dense enough to see any curvature out there. at our tiny 6-foot size to an 8,000 mile wide ball, roughly. So you're going to have to go way up in the air to see it. And a plane is not high enough. And 165,000 foot weather balloon's not high enough. It's not high enough. I know that's frustrating. I mean, isn't it frustrating you can't easily go up enough to see the curvature of the Earth? But don't blame the entire model of the universe for that difficulty. The man ain't keeping you down from seeing the curvature of the Earth. It's just a difficult physical thing to do. And again, if we were like gigantic creatures, if we were like 200-mile or 200-foot tall beings, then we would have biological problems existing on this planet, right? And so we are the size that we are because we are proportional to the size of this planet. What things are much larger than us? Well, there's a few creatures in the jungle. There's a couple, gorillas out there that can get a little bit bigger than us. But the biggest things are things that live in this sort of relative gravity bubble called the ocean. And so a whale can get gigantic because a whale has all kinds of pressure on all sides. That's why when a whale gets out of the ocean, it starts to crush itself. So if we were aquatic, human beings could probably get as big as a, humpback whale. But let me just connect some more dots here. So you pour yourself your favorite bubbly beverage, whatever that is. And you should do this if you're, feeling a little angst from what I'm saying. Hopefully you don't. Hopefully you feel well respected. But beer, champagne, soda water, whatever, get it in a nice clear big glass and just sit there without anyone bothering you and stare at the bubbles. Just stare at them and stare at them and stare at them. Give yourself a good half hour plus. And just ask yourself how those things are existing in water. How is that happening? Now, once you're done with that exercise and you've totally exhausted, I don't care if you sit there for 8 hours. Just look at it until you accept that nothing around you, a Rothschild, a Windsor, a Pessoa, is not telling that bubble to be round. It's not a Masonic lodge that's telling it to be round or some Jesuit church branch. It's the universe telling it to be round. So there's no conspiracy around the shape of a bubble. We think that all these organizations have lied to us about the shape of the Earth. Okay, well, the bubble isn't being lied about. You can see the sun, it's round. You can see the moon, it's round. If you have a 10,000 pound or 10,000 power, hopefully not 10,000 pound telescope, you can see a planet out there. Jupiter, at least. One of our listeners took her son's photographs that he took of Jupiter and posted it. I loved it. Now, while you're where you are, get your cell phone out, your nearest internet device that you prefer to read on, and I want you to look up how electricity behaves like water. Just read a few sort of intro 101 articles about how electricity works. And there'll be this epiphany, hopefully, that, oh my God, the electronic valence, the conductive surface of a particular conductive material, flows a bit like water. The more surface you have on a wire, the more amperage you can get out of it. The per unit per second amount of power that's being transmitted down a wire. Well, if I had a hose here, which I do, but I have to push water in the back of the hose to push water out of the front of the hose. When someone turns off the hose and you've got 20 foot all wound up in your front yard as you water your lawn, it just goes, a little bit of leak out, and you can kind of step on the hose to get a little bit of come up, but you're introducing pressure to push stuff out. But if someone turns it back on, kapow, here comes the water. Well, that's exactly why your power outlet in your house doesn't sit there zapping everybody who walks by it. But the second you plug in an appliance, pow, here comes the electricity. If those of you who have worked in industrial parks, you got 280 outlets. I mean, you've got all kinds of massive power that will kill you in a second if you happen to draw it across your heart. What this illustrates is a congruent nature of how all things work in the universe. And of course, this stick has a nice tunnel down the center, ever so slight. So as you look at these memes and these beautiful 3D animated videos of, you know, things falling off the bottom of the earth, and then that hurts the brain, think about the bubbles. If you were to stand on the bubble, shrink yourself down to a little molecule, and you were to get down in there inside your beer or whatever, and you stand on the bottom of that bubble, you would be shocked to find out you could, if you were small enough. Unfortunately, the gravitational ability for my body to hang on to heat is waning with this overcast day. But now let me give you a little tidbit here that might be exciting for you. Now let's say this. When you first got introduced to this flat earth thing, it was extremely exciting because you felt yourself in sort of this epiphany mode. And there was something glorious about it. Perhaps if you're religious, it made things make more sense. Perhaps you had lost your religion and you got into it and you rediscovered your religion. Getting closer to God is always a good thing no matter how you do it, in my opinion. So now maybe one of the psychoses that we might be introducing to ourselves would be, well, damn, if I'm wrong, and I've posted literally 1,000 posts all over the world that it's flat, and then I find out, and it actually is a globe, okay, then you might be resisting any change back to a previous theory, although we're going to get to something cool here. And so you just kind of double down on it. And again, if you're new to this, if you're new to flat earth, and you're new to this notion that gravity isn't what they said it was, which it isn't what they say it is, because again, the official story is that mass pulls on mass. That doesn't happen. There could be tangling frequencies that could intertwine. That does happen. Static electricity pulls on things because it's created this sort of a way to explain it would be sort of a Velcro frequency, where there's a way of vibrating and catching other particles in the vibration. Again, once you have a pole that goes around and around like a magnet pulls on steel. That is because the magnet has an ethereal inability to hang on to all of its integral mass, and so it has these poles, and so then it literally digs its fingernails into steel and yanks it towards itself. And technically speaking, the way the solar system works could have a little bit of that magnetism property to it as well. But now, let's offer you something different. It seems like the only option is that you believe it's flat or you believe it's round. You either go with NASA or you go with this new movement, which is actually a really old way of believing that the world was put together. Okay. Well, what if you go to a third place and you go stand over there with Tesla? You go stand over there with Volta, Ohm, Faraday, Steinmetz, all these dudes. You stand over there with all these uber geniuses, and that's the third place you can go where you don't have to stand next to some Masonic apron-wearing douche who's lying to the world about everything. So what's interesting about that is you go from the world being flat over to a place where it's round again, but almost every single thing you've been told about how everything works in terms of electromagnetism and ether and gravity is totally different, except that angsty place you lived where you were trying to prove the world was flat, but there's just no way to do it. Again, where the fuck is the trip to the Antarctica, to the wall? Why hasn't someone been able to pull that off? I know it's not easy, but Jesus, we got billionaires who believe this thing. Work it out, man. Work it out. I know it's a formidable place, trust me. But you pull out of that world and you go to a place where you can prove everything because these guys invented, these guys, I love that, this group of people discovered electricity, discovered ether, moving 50 times faster than the speed of light, and then they invented a ton of crap that took advantage of it. And what's funny is, we now assume, and I know it sounds nuts, but we now assume, through examining the pyramids on the Giza Plateau, that those frickin' things were batteries. Big giant power stations. Using the plateau, which is the catacomb of water, using the aqua ravine that's down below, naturally bringing up the Earth's plasma core to energize whatever's above, probably a meridian line underneath that, where there's a natural crack underneath that aqua ravine. At least back in the day when they were building the pyramids in the first place, there might have been a huge adjustment to the way that the world worked. Now, the one thing that we really don't have a beat on, you're going to have people say they do, I don't think we do, which is how fast does this world change? Meaning the physical crust of the world. You know, there's Neil Adams' expanding Earth theory, which I wholeheartedly believe in. I don't know that we know how fast it actually changes, but you have all kinds of wild studies. One group of folks have studied expanding Earth, and the 19 centimeters, it expands a year nowadays, and they reverse engineer it. You have to the point where it's 1/4 the size during some proverbial, fake dinosaur era. And then you have the German scientists that studied the salt concentration in the ocean, and they came out and said, look, man, I don't think these oceans are more than about 65 million years old, because if you go back, it loses more and more of its density. So what are we trying to do with this whole, flat earth thing in the first place? With the truth movement, with all the agendas for the very real bad politician, bad banker, bad monarch world that we're living in here. The subtext of the whole flat earth thing is that these people have lied to you and got you to divorce the true model of the earth 500 years ago, and so you're fighting to restore that old model. All right. But what if you could go off to this third group? And then you've got undeniable proof of the way things work. You can go back to the pyramids and have undeniable proof. If you listen to the electrical engineers that look at the pyramids and study the conductiveness of the limestones that are in the center versus the limestones on the outside versus the red granite that makes up the corridors, this starts to become extremely undeniable that the effect of this place would be generating a tremendous amount of electricity. The archaeologist back in the 30s, the 1930s, who was on top of the one of the pyramids, and he was eating lunch with all of his workers, and he noticed that all of the utensils started sparking real badly, and so he got this idea real quick. He created a Baghdad battery using a bottle of wine that wasn't quite full. He put a cloth on the top, jammed a fork down it or some knife or something, and then held it up in the air on the tip of the pyramid, and within a few seconds it zapped an arc off the bottle and hit a worker who was eating his lunch, and he fell down at least a step or two, and they started trying to attack the guy because he said he was engaging in witchcraft. All he did was realize the place is a gigantic power station. And then in an infinitesimal way, with the fork and this gigantic pyramid scraping all of this electromagnetic waves out of ethereal collisions with the limestone itself, they were able to, the stones incubate up dielectric and magnetism waves, which then collide and make electricity. And he's up there with an extremely conductive piece of metal. I guess it's not quite a Baghdad battery, I shouldn't say that, but he created a little arcing mechanism. It's beautiful. So again, if you need to retreat potentially. And you can make this a very slow migration in your own mind. And again, no one is on earth that is part of this awakening is going to not continue to examine this flat earth suggestion. Hey, we're waiting for someone to prove something. We're waiting to see a gyroscope not change when you fly from London to Cairo. Haven't seen it. Heard plenty of people say that that's the case. We've heard all these Navy folks and artillery guys that say that the Coriolis effect is not something that they ever counteract, meaning the curvature of the Earth. They don't ever factor that into anything, even though that's what you're told. You've got snipers that are supposedly making adjustments for this, but then they say they don't. I'm not sure a projectile out of a gun is ever going to need to have any correction for curvature. But even back in Desert Storm in 1991, the M1 Abrams tank could shoot these guys from 15 miles away. Now you're starting to get into maybe some curvature calculations. But these guys say they don't. We have, experiments that basically say the curvature seems like it's there, but it's minute compared to what they say it is, which is where you sort of get that theory of a contact lens Truman Show container on top of a much bigger ball. But then how do you explain the sun and the moon? But let me throw this at you. What if those that run the world started examining this internet thing, started examining, and imagine they have all the truth about as much as man has ever dug out of the ground for history of pre-existing civilizations, their own civilizations, science, 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 applying quotes. But say that they know everything. They know it is ether. They know it is all these other things. And they've got us strung out on oil. They've suppressed all zero-point energy machines. They have kept us from understanding how the world expands, because that leads you to understand how crude oil is a byproduct of the Earth's existence and has nothing to do with prehistoric matter deteriorating. Yes, mass turns back into combustible methane. That's because it was originally created from those fundamental particles. But that has nothing to do with how crude oil is created at the center of the Earth. Not the center of the Earth, but the crust of the Earth. Just on the edge of the plasma sphere it's inside. And so what they do is they say, okay, we're going to have a huge problem here because everyone's waking up, and they're waking up fast. What we need to do is to do what they do to, these key witnesses in court. Now, what has been the case in court a million times? Someone is conducting a crime, a scam, and it's been going for a long time. Perhaps a politician's getting bribed, perhaps somebody's selling drugs in your neighborhood, or whatever the scam is. Well, you and I, who don't break the law, we don't see these things happening because we're not involved in those circles. We're not invited in. We've never lived a shady life, and so we never see it. So when they have a witness come in against a mob boss who has been close enough to see the scam, they know who's involved in what they do, they go into court, and then you have a mob boss who's almost bona fide criminal, organized crime, and you have a person who's far less of a criminal trying to whistleblow on this hefty asset. And so the attorneys, the defense attorneys, start to attack the credibility of this informant by saying, look, this person's a prostitute, this person's a drug dealer, this person's a killer. Don't believe anything that they say. And the jury's just kind of left out there on their own to decipher through all of the facts to see if they believe a little bit of what that person says, see if there's a motive against that person. And, sadly, in some circumstances, like the Michael Jackson accusations, you do have a whole family that's been trained to lie. So there's a bit of a problem there. But committing crimes and lying, sometimes they go hand in hand, sometimes they don't. But now, what if you are the witness to the lies? You have enough intelligence to realize that NASA hasn't done anything that they've said within reason, that science is completely off center, the Big Bang's crap, dark matter's crap, black holes are crap, because they've got they have the entire definition of gravity reversed. They're saying it's a pull. We know that the geniuses of the universe said it was a push. And so they put out these alternate theories in not just flat Earth, but everything that exists out there, to see if gullible, sweet people will somehow adopt it and start preaching it, such that when those same people find all the other conspiracies that have a lot of validity, now they can pull you into court. I mean, let's say you're an expert on everything they've ever said about flat Earth, and you're a believer. But you also know everything about fiat currency, about fractional reserve banking, about child trafficking, child molestation, all these things. You're an expert on all these conspiracies. But you've posted a ton of stuff about this flat Earth thing. Well, they bring you into court. And this is really social media's platform. It ain't a court of law. But they say, see that person over there? They said that we're a bunch of child molesters. They say that we use Red Cross to launder money around the world. And these kids keep disappearing at all these disasters, and they find them in buses, owned and operated by the Hillary Foundation. All these real things that need to stop. But they go, but they believe the world is flat. And then you're subtracted out of the equation of potentially affecting any change in the universe. Your family could just do this without a trial. They could just simply say, yeah, we got an uncle that believes in the world's flat. Can you believe that shit? And he also believes Lee Harvey Oswald wasn't the one that shot JFK, and he also believes this and that and this and that and this. Well, you're erased as being a useful asset in the Great Awakening. This is a big deal. I think it would be ingenious to create all these alternate theories and help accentuate it. Even as an intelligence agency, you're putting out assets that are going to claim to be former employees of NASA, claim to have been at tables where people said, oh, no, well, the world's flat, and you're going to run into the disk, and it's going to be ha-ha, hoo-hoo-hoo. Like that one guy that's the comedian and the artist. I don't mean to pick on that guy, but let's just say he was inserted into the narrative. And he runs around doing a comedy bit in these little bars, pointing at the pictures and showing how it's all fake. And maybe NASA has created those fake assets. But then you link that guy to some other crazy, and all of a sudden NASA looks like they're not lying. Because the guy that exposed the lies of NASA is fully compromised in a different way. The name of the game is to keep your integrity as high as possible, such that, you could say, like people ask me, like I said to you guys the other day, I had a good friend of mine look at me during lunch, and we're not talking about anything major conspiratorial, and he said, what do you think about this flat Earth thing? And the way he asked me, I should say, if you were there, I think you would know that he was... he had been down the rabbit hole a little bit, and he didn't say these crazy bastards that believe the world is flat. He didn't say it like that at all. He said it quite neutral, as if he has a few of his own toes in that pool. And let's just be honest with ourselves. There's a bit of us that thinks it would be exciting to find out it's a dome. I would find that so utterly science fiction, unbelievable and exciting. I mean, wow, there's a whole nother frontier on the other side of this barrier of ice. Potentially there's a glass dome, potentially there's a bunch of continents on the other side, and you get to meet a whole bunch of new people, go to these new continents, these new cities. You could eat new food, you could see new forms of entertainment, new space age technology. I mean, Jesus, isn't that not exciting? I mean, seriously, there's motivation to get into this. Unfortunately, most of the theories about what is actually at the wall, or where the wall would be, they're probably the least defined areas of the conspiracy itself. But what are they telling us about, what's on the other side of a dome? Water. Okay, well, we have these things called stars, whatever the hell they are. And they don't wobble like a big giant refracting pool of water. So apparently that water on the other side is still. There's absolutely no variant in its density, and I mean it is the most perfect still pool ever created in the universe. But we have this stuff moving around up inside that area, potentially. My other concern about not understanding gravity, as it's been defined by the geniuses that discovered all of electricity, at least in the modern age, right? We have to give Egyptians a potential of having figured it out. How much change and invention and innovation could exist if we truly understood how the universe is put together? I'm thinking the whole next era of mankind could be completely understood. What if you believed in flat Earth, but you also believed in aliens from outer space? Okay, well then where do they come from? Oh, we have to default to interdimensional theories. We have to think about it as a hard dome. On the other side, it's not water. It's actually some place. And they just open a side door and come flying in, and they close the side door and they leave. It is sort of my belief, personally, at this stage of my life, that if you believe in aliens, then you do adopt the heliocentric ball. Again, you do not have to adopt any of the sort of mainstream science out there that tells you how it all works. You could reject nearly all of it, because I think there's plenty of evidence to suggest that that's the case, that it's untrue. That used to be that we would think of things and get things wrong, but we were trying to get it right. And so we had these theories about the world being on the back of a turtle. All right, that's someone trying to explain something they don't understand, right? So they're doing their best. Okay. But now we know by close observation that those groups that I keep mentioning in this video, they have a policy to reverse and invert everything that is true. The bad guys are the good guys. The good guys are the bad guys. If gravity is a push, they have to say it's a pull. And then to further sustain their absurd theories, because they eventually find, it's not hard to believe once you figure out how ether works and negative pressure works, the whole body's together in space. It's very easy to understand. A child could understand it. So they have to put more sort of paperweights on top of this ridiculous theory to further make it absurd. When I, used to go into my whole thing about the non-existence of, mythical saviors in organized religion on Earth, the followers that have a bit of an angst about that, they bring in their Bibles or their whatever as paperweights on top of their own theory. And so they have a self-defining, self-validating mechanism to say, no, you don't understand our mythical fiction. Our book will tell you why our book is true. Well, what do you think organized science is doing? What do you think Neil deGrasse Tyson's entire job is, whether he realizes it or not? Hawking's job. I think Hawking was a kid who grew up inside of all this indoctrination and became extremely clever about keeping the indoctrination going, having no idea that he was completely wrong. I think it's his second book, Black Holes and Baby Universes. There's that line at the end of a paragraph that says that he really no longer believed that the Big Bang necessarily occurred. And then his next book was all dedicated to how the Big Bang was true. It was sort of a big spanking on his hand. How dare you threaten the very integrity of Cambridge University by saying that, your celebrated PhD work in the Big Bang is fake. We just spent, 30 years trying to prove this is true. Your next book's going to be about your apology to mankind, but you're not going to say you're sorry. You're just going to do your damnedest to make all this true. This is our control mechanism on humanity. They cannot find out how this works, because it'll lead to all this self-empowerment that the society could have. I truly believe, as primitive as some of these tribes are in Africa, if they were to have some things explained, there's always some genius in wherever you are in the world. You know, they're trying to create a space program over there. Some of these guys could probably create a perpetual motion machine / zero-point energy mechanism to create infinite power, or to take a little bit of power and create way more than you put in. They could figure it out. They could figure out what Stan Myers figured out, either completely by themselves or by doing research on Stan Myers, looking at his schematics, watching the specials that de-obfuscate his schematics so you can understand how it works. And they could have it. And all of a sudden, Africa is producing a massive amount of electricity, as much as they need. And once you can do that, you can turn on machines, you can turn on lights, you can fuel hospitals, and all of a sudden they get a lot more healthy. And once they stop, you know, fighting among themselves, once the warlords are pulled out of power because the people are like, yeah, you and your fucking genocidal battle that the IMF and the World Bank is paying you to conduct on each other, we're not going to be in your army anymore, because you know why? This zero-point energy system is, we're like 2 days away from having anti-gravity, and we're either going to leave or we're going to take over this planet. I hope you feel me on this, right? What I don't see, personally, is any connection whatsoever with Flat Earth and the denial of gravity. I don't get it. Why is gravity having to take one on the chin just because you believe that we're in some celestial God-based dome? Doesn't make any sense to me. The bubble still occurs inside the dome. And so the forces and the physics that make a bubble happen is the exact same thing that holds the whole heliocentric model together. It's beautiful. It's potentially infinite in terms of our measurement of space and time. It even explains a lot of the absurdity coming out of the official science realms. Doesn't, you know, it negates a bunch of the stuff I always say. But in terms of gravity waves, well, of course. We know this universe is not equally dense because we have me right here, and then there's this space between me and the camera. You can see me because the lens is able to reflect light off of me. This is just waves of ether bouncing around so quickly that it looks like what we call a photon. But now let's look into the future. Let's say that we go the distance with this whole thing. We do pop out of this this total absolute theory of flat Earth, and we just leave it there. And there's going to be people that are going to research it. You may continue to research it. But you go off to this third group. You're no longer in the heliocentric pull gravity. You're in the push gravity model over there with all the geniuses that have ever lived in the last 150 years. I guess technically about 170 years. Okay. Let me tell you a story about when the Mormons come to visit me at my house. They come over, ring the doorbell, and typically they've been sending me females lately, so they can't be in my house without a female in the house. So I pull them out here to the patio, pull out the chairs, we sit and talk. It's pretty much the same thing. Their whole mission is to get you baptized, and they again say that any baptism you had prior to their baptism is an unauthorized baptism, of course, which is the control apparatus of all religions, right? But these kids are like 19 to 21, somewhere in there. So you just kind of go, they mean well. They mean me a lot of good, I should say. But then I'm pretty honest with them about my lack of belief that the Savior that's part of that organized religion, because they have two saviors, right? They have Christ and they have Joseph Smith. And I tell them that, obviously, I don't believe Jesus ever existed. And Joseph Smith, well, I don't know. He's a complex story. Okay. Now, their whole thing is to genuinely believe that my soul is in jeopardy, that if I go to the other side, the other realm, without a belief, a devout belief that Christ is my Savior, blah, 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 that somehow I'm going to some shithole. Okay. What I have said for the last 10 years, because I never had to say it before, I never had to think it through, was essentially this. If I get to the other side, and Christ is on the other side, again, I don't think there's any penalties for having critical thinking. So I don't think there's any punishment for using logic. Just like Hobson said, you know, I want to believe, but Jesus, you're nowhere around. Okay. And again, the faith that someone had to have in the proverbial Christ era is zero. They got to meet God. So they get a free pass to heaven, whereas we have to use this faith-based, there's no God talking to us, telling us to kill our children to prove our, you know, loyalty to the dude. What an asshole that guy is in that story. But you get to this side and you find out it's all true. All right. So you high-five Christ. Say, man, you know I didn't believe, right? Yeah, totally. My God. You know, it's just a process. We had to let the Satan take over the earth before we'd have a reason to have a judgment day. It's a little kooky story Dad came up with, but whatever. All right, bye, five. I'll see you later, man. Yeah, cool. You going to the party tonight? Yeah, okay. The after hours judgment day party. I tell you that story because that's the way you would believe if you left this total absolute truth flat earth movement. You don't say it's wrong necessarily because you don't have enough proof necessarily. Neither do the NASA-ites, right? So you go over to this third group and you say, you know what, I'm going to at least sit in a pool of truth over here because I don't have to BS myself about how it works. And it's important that you, I think, each individual of the world, male, female, young, old, middle-aged, whatever, gets into this third group, which is the initial group. Or maybe actually not. Maybe it's not. Chronologically, it's probably the last group to exist. Well, maybe the liars are the last one to be made, probably. But I want you over there because there are inventions to be had by understanding that group over there. The original discoverers of the modern age electricity. What if the Egyptians really did have power plants and those were the pyramids and they had, you know, Jesus, they've got hundreds and hundreds of them and there's a bunch of them all over the world. It's not like they had the only game in town. Maybe they were the first group in town and they migrated around the world and through inbreeding of the, you know, one guy looked a different way and he inbred that and ate the fruit and vegetables and animals over there. And so they ended up looking like South American people. And then one of them went to Asia and had a different look and whatever. But through just sheer dominance, some Genghis Khan algorithm going over and over and over, Rome destroying things, they essentially had their beautiful utopia of advanced technology ripped out of their hands and thus lost. Again, we don't have hieroglyphs for how the pyramids were built. But we have hieroglyphs for how you go to heaven, how they embalm you, what's going to be like in the afterlife. Okay, so these people were capable of rendering any image they could think of in their brain. They have sculptures that are absolutely perfect to a human face. Geometrically so perfect, we don't even know how they made them. All right. Wouldn't you want to get closer to that essence, that beautiful simplicity that it seems that they lived in, but bring it back in the modern age? If an intelligence agency is simply incubating up these alternate theories, and it's not just flat earth, man, it's every alternate theory of everything. You know, Jacqueline Kennedy shot JFK. Anything to preoccupy your mind away from legitimate progress, then you let them win and we lose as a human race. Think about how many stories, movies, television shows that wouldn't exist if we haven't theorized that the world was a ball and that we're in this gigantic place called the universe, and that, you know, there's similarities between all celestial bodies, and eventually we can build craft to escape our planet, travel the universe. What if that had never happened? I don't know about you, but I dig Star Wars, Star Trek, all the other science fiction space travel shows that have ever existed. There's a whole bunch of goodness that happened once we started finding out that perhaps we're not at the center of the universe. And it's not to make man insignificant whatsoever. If anything, it shows how unbelievably remarkable we are as a sentient being. A bacteria that gains such power in his own realization, self-realization, that we could build a craft, a mechanical device to traverse the area of which we are, which is the universe, and perhaps find other humanoids, other creatures out there that have superior intelligence, equal intelligence, less intelligence, and start having a dialogue with really the full gamut of what a creator might have invested in. And if it's all completely random and we're all just one being, well, then you get to learn about that. You're essentially combing over the fingerprints of the universe and how it was created. What I'm trying to do is work from empirical evidence that is provable, observable and provable. So are you in the flat earth realm. You go and you look at an ocean, you see a body of water that's flat. You see a lake that's flat. And so I understand the passion of saying, look, you know, you're the one that's in denial about this whole thing. I don't see curvature. And then I'm like, solve the problem of being high enough to see any. And then as soon as you don't see it at 80 miles and everything is still flat, then you got something. Well, you might, someone on the official side of things goes, well, look at all of the International Space Station video of Earth. Well, we know from their footage, Earth is being filmed through some massive fisheye lens because the curvature in their shots is insane. It goes really, really tight, super curved, and it flattens out and tight. Now, you would see a shitload of curvature at 250 miles up. You would. But you won't see this, oh, the Earth looks like a tiny marble in the shot. And now, they've never done something as literally absurd as that, but a lot of the curvature they show us in these shots is artificial. You see the camera move, and just like the guy jumping out of the Red Bull thing, it's like wonky Earth shapes, right? So they're not really the solution. Again, the ISS can't see any stars. The ISS never films the moon. The ISS doesn't even have a window towards the moon. As far as I understand, there's no windows towards space. Well, that seems like a bunch of crap to me. You're going to build a space station, and you don't put most of the windows, like what is it? The Enterprise always has a tin forward, this place where you can go and lounge and chill out with everybody, and it's towards the front of the ship. And so you can just essentially look out, you know, while you're sipping on your synth ale. You can look out, you know, if the mission in the fictional Star Trek episode is about, you know, I just watched one with the Moriarty, like I told you, a Jupiter-type planet was being swallowed up by a star, and they were watching it. Okay, well, in tin forward, you'd be able to look out the front and see that happening. So why wouldn't you want to have constant observation of the celestial bodies from a space station instead of this absolute shithole of wires and human hair and all these, you know, big fibrous sweaters everyone's wearing? It makes no sense. It's like one of the most unscientific scientific places in the universe. So I understand the skepticism, trust me. Once you get into the ethereal models of gravity, wings on planes make sense. Planets hanging on to planets make sense. The world expanding, the sun expanding, the sun expanding would have to have some other big injection, but all the planets and moons expanding make complete sense. I think it explains in a huge way how the pyramids were built, especially when you start studying the Coral Castle guy. Dude's moving 60-ton stones by himself at night. And when the day comes up, he uses, he's pretty much got the stone where he wants it, and so all he's doing is using pulleys and electricity to make the stone weigh a lot less by probably vibrating the stone at a point where ethereal winds that would be normally pushing down from outer space go through the stone more than hit the stone. And then you have a stone that might weigh 6,000 pounds. And then your pulley and your wood could upright it and move it where you need it to be. That explains how he moved it after he built it. Is that not exciting? If you have children, you could raise them with this technology and understanding of the universe. And again, if you're new to ethereal models of the universe, then again, go look up Eric Dollard. His lectures are a little dry, but he reads you the books written by these geniuses. And he shows you the conspiracy that debuted after these gentlemen died off. He shows you that little overlap between Einstein and Tesla. And again, if there's any quote that Einstein may have said that is just, for me, the linchpin in this whole game is, you know, they said someone asked him the question, I'm paraphrasing, you know, what's it like to be the smartest man in the world? And he goes, I don't know. Why don't you go ask Tesla? Okay. So the guy that said that ether doesn't exist, or contributed heavily to the experimentation and the theoretical models of the universe, that said ether can exist, doesn't exist, we've done some experiments, which is all horse shit, says go talk to the guy that completely believes that ether exists and built all of his patents off of the very realization that ether is real. The guy, and if he actually said that, he would have undone his entire personal theories about the universe. I'm hoping this gets us on the same page, and I hope this gives us alternatives where you sit there and go, look, if you're in the third group and flat earth comes in as true because someone finally does an experiment, I mean, literally, the best thing we could have is a drone that, because traversing the South Pole is extremely formidable, it's super cold and all this other stuff, you build a drone that can survive 60 below zero, and it can go hundreds of miles very, very quickly. It's got plenty of battery power. Maybe it's one of these gigantic drones I've seen at trade shows. They're like 5 foot square. And you get that thing, you fly up over the ice barrier of Game of Thrones, and you haul ass on that thing. And you just have a video camera, and that thing is never, it's designed to never come back. You don't care if it ever comes back because you're rich. And you just boogie that thing to where you think the barrier is going to end in a dome, and all of a sudden it goes pow, and it hits something in midair, and hopefully the camera would survive for at least a split second to film what it ran into. But even if it ends, you know how far that drone went inland, and that becomes your new target. We're going to try to fly that far. Then again, the Navy has said that they've traversed and flown over the South Pole a bunch of times to map it. Well, that would mean they lied. So it's just like me going to whatever is after this world, and Jesus walks up to me and says, dude, I was real. Joke's on you, Jack. Oh, man, you got me. And then it's over. So you're over in this third group actually building inventions that help the world, and you find out it's flat later. All right, doesn't negate the science that's over there. It just says, well, where you are is this container for some reason. That if you ever wanted to be visited by the creators of the universe, go and develop technology that frees you from this one, and they'll probably visit you. You know, they're probably going to go, oh, you got it. You finally found the formula. You have to come with us now, but good job. But if that became a gigantic awakening, epiphany of the entire planet, and the whole planet, you know, instead of some guy coveting his invention to make a few bucks, he's constantly keeping an open source research program, and there's guys from China, Japan, Russia, all of Europe, Americas, South America, Africa, everyone's participating in this open source, ethereal-based invention movement, then they can't get us all, unless they flood the whole place again. But perhaps freeing ourselves is nothing more than a state of consciousness. You know, one thing I love, and then I'll shut up here, one thing I love about the Star Trek universe is this beautiful thing I just talked about in a previous episode, but the whole Zephyr and Cochrane storyline where he's this drunk, washed up aerospace guy that eventually, you know, he's created this warp coil thing and he can't get it to launch because it's sort of in this post-apocalyptic world, and he eventually flies it, hits warp, comes back. Of course, he's got two of the Star Trek guys with him, which is funny, and then the Vulcans show up to say, okay, you've made first contact with the universe, we're going to make contact with you, and you got to, you know, use our policies of the galaxy. There might be something to that if you could figure out how to completely manhandle the universe by understanding how it works. You know, maybe the first thing man does is travel at infinite warp. Some total, what is it? No, it's the infinite probability drive that was in the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. You create that thing, and the owners will show up, if there are any. The other members of the solar system, of the universe show up. Maybe the solar system too. You can fly straight to Mars on your first day. And you have full inertial dampers in your system. You can go as fast as you want. You can confirm or deny anything that NASA said that they've done. You can fly straight to the moon, go to the Sea of Tranquility, and it's completely barren of any man-made things. And you're like, you didn't go to the moon. Isn't that more exciting than sitting here bickering over the shape of the world? That's where I think we could be if we could just move everybody who's an original thinker and as a critical thinker and move them into this camp of these dudes from, 1850 to the 1930s. It's going to be exciting if we could do it. Anyway, I hope you feel me. Hope you find that valuable. Again, I respect every single person who's off on these adventures. Trust me. Hopefully you didn't feel disrespected in this episode. Outrageous claims require outrageous evidence. And we don't have the evidence on either side of NASA's argument or the Flat Earth argument. But we know a lot about the mechanics of the universe in this third group. So let's put some effort into that one. Don't let them tie us up in things that will jeopardize our credibility at a future point. It's okay to investigate everything. Maybe don't throw down so hard that you have it all figured out when you don't have the proof. Proof. You know, if I was talking to a friend of mine who's always reading a ton of science books. He's not exactly a science guy, but I was telling him about that mirage, quote unquote, of Chicago being filmed from like 60, 70 miles away. And, of course, someone just recently posted that the official story about how far you can see the Statue of Liberty is 60 miles away, which would be 2,400 feet on the other side of a ball. And this dude just looked at me and he goes, well, don't they understand that light bends through the natural refraction of the atmosphere? And then under certain conditions, with moisture especially being introduced into it, right? Because you look at Chicago, you're looking at over a body of water. You look at the Statue of Liberty, it's in the Hudson Bay, I think, right? And it is over a body of water. And so you might get the very light waves that are in a three-dimensional pattern, right? They would normally go tangent to the curve, and you think that all that light's going to go straight out into space. But with an ethereal wind pushing down on these very ripples on the pond in a three-dimensional way, that light could be simply going around the edge of the Earth because it's being affected by a force that's pushing it down. The ripples of a rock being thrown in a pond are always on the outer texture of the water, right? So the lake is flat. So the ripples come to you in a flat manner. Okay. Well, if we could create a ripple on the edge of a bubble, that ripple is going to go on the curve of the bubble edge. And light is not made of something that's so different that it's going to have its own rules. You try to read a newspaper through a shot glass being held sideways, where you're looking at it through the cylindrical body, not through like the bottom, which is what we do for magnifying glasses, right? But look through the side of the lens. It's tough to read it because the light's bending all around the glass. It's refracting. Well, that's the solid state version of what atmosphere does. Atmosphere has been introduced as a mechanism to explain flat Earth, but we negate its other explanation for how light could potentially bend. Maybe if the Statue of Liberty was in the center of, some desert, and then you go way, way back, 60 miles, and you try to look at it, maybe you won't see it because there's not enough moisture coming off the desert to bend that light. Anyway, if you haven't been to deepthoughtsradio.com, please go. It has audio, video feeds, the locked Facebook group with a bunch of cool people that believe and explore everything that exists. We have two ways to contribute to the page. We have Patreon and PayPal. We also have a Twitter account I always forget to mention. And the new link to Season 1 Remastered, which will have just shy of 100 episodes when completely finished, but it will be viewable from all sectors of the world with no copyright infringements, hopefully, and we'll be cooking with gas. All right, until the next episode, take care of yourself and someone else, and I'll see you in the next Deep Thoughts. Over now.